This next panel is brought to you by RevUnit. RevUnit is an award-winning digital strategy and product studio. They taught a workshop yesterday, and Chris Coy has been the one to bring this together. Chris Coy is the Vice President of Design and Customer Experience at RevUnit. I'm sure he's going to talk about it as a part of this panel, but he was formerly at Zappos and has been a big part of both some of Zappos's changes and then now at RevUnit helping Zappos to really isolate and identify some of the work that they have done to take systems that are happening already at Zappos, uncover them, and turn them into products that Zappos employees can continue to use. So understanding the processes that are already internal to a company and make them a little bit more plain and functional and usable. Chris will introduce the full panel, but I am so excited for this conversation. We don't talk enough about what it actually takes to change. For individuals in a 1,500 person company like Zappos, for individuals in a 7-person company like Xandr Media, right? So much of these conversations are, what are actually the steps required to take that little step forward and to show up how we want to at work? And so that's what we're going to be diving into. I'll let Chris bring out all of the panelists and let's give them a standing ovation, shall we? Thank you very much, Chris.
Okay, can you hear me all right? All right, so one of the things that we get to do a lot as change agents is change things. So I'm gonna kind of express a moment of vulnerability here and ask everyone to come into the center and into the front, please. So let's all shift chairs. There's not as many of us, so I'd love to have us all be a little bit more intimate. So if you're willing, not a requirement to AGB's comment, but a suggestion. Let's all move towards the center. And also thank you for the standing ovation. That was very nice. All right, while we're doing that, I'll start to introduce some of the people. So I'm just going to go from my left, your right, starting with Jenny Smith. So Jenny Smith, one of the things that in my role at RevUnit, I get to facilitate a lot of different ideation exercises with clients, big and small, often big. And one of the things that we do and I'm sure based on the conversations I've been having yesterday and today with some of y'all, I recognize that there's a lot of facilitators in the room. So one of the things that I've seen to be really successful that is helpful is to do something we call an icebreaker, because oftentimes we'll have a lot of people new in the room, and at times it can be pretty staid to have people just say, my name is X, my title is X, and then look to their left, and then you just go around the circle. So the way we like to do it, which helps us also read a power dynamic within a room, which is really helpful depending on you. These are all people that are new to you, don't necessarily know them, is to do something we call an icebreaker, which is where you ask some token representative from a group if they can represent everyone in the room that's the client. Often that works, but we do it too for RevUnit, is to introduce a person and say something nice about them. What is great about this is it helps us tell stories, which I think is the way culture is transmitted. And it also allows us to learn things that we might not otherwise, and even produces opportunities for people to then pipe up and say, like, oh, well, let me clarify this. I didn't want you to tell them that I am an avid whiskey drinker or whatever, right? Like one person mentioned that she liked to collect oddities from curiosity shops, and that she had mummified toes. I was just like, okay, that's awesome. Anyway, so going that direction. Jenny Smith, that's her real name. So I joke with that because Jenny's worked in government for a long time. So I was asking her if she was a spy, and that was just a pseudonym because she can't talk about many of the projects that she's had a chance to do. One of the most recent things that she's done, and why I think it's really fascinating to have her participating in this, is that she worked at the United States Digital Service, helping both build teams and transform an organization that we're all participants in, on wildly different perspectives and sides, I'm sure, in helping build digital teams of change agents and technologists and designers and products, and build some of the tools that we use as taxpayers. I want to call us customers, but it's probably not the right. I mean, we could be construed as customers.
We usually said citizens or users, depending on what we were talking about.
Awesome. So that's Jenny. And next to Jenny is Tabitha Mcfadden. She's VP of People, or I should say Jenny's title too. Jenny was Head of People Operations at United States Digital Service, which we will probably heretofore refer to as USDS. So I don't think we're going to have too many acronyms flying around, but that's one. And then Tabitha Mcfadden, she's at RevUnit. She's VP of People Operations. A nice thing about Tabitha that I've always appreciated is in an agency landscape or reality, oftentimes there's a lot of pressure, and it's nice to have that empathetic individual who can stand up for and represent the needs of the team and the employee and ground us in that importance of ultimately what we are helping build and sell is the capacity of individuals to help deliver on the expectations. And Tabitha does a tremendous job at that. And then next to Tabitha is Ragini Holloway. Ragini works at Affirm, which is a fintech or financial services company that helps individuals reach goals and that they might not otherwise be able to through, I want to call it like micro lending in a way. Is that a good way to phrase it? And what I like about, and you know, for me too, some of these people are new. Jenny is a new friend of mine, Ragini and Chris. Ragini, the way I would characterize Ragini is kind of like an open book that you want to read because it's a great story. Yeah. And that's been my experience of Ragini in the past week and a half as we've had an opportunity to interact and prep for this. The benefit that I'm sure we all experienced in the small breakouts was that we each had an opportunity to form little clusters of new friends that we could talk to. That's awesome. There's people singing backstage. I don't know if you can hear it. And and so Ragini gets to do that, represents that. She cares deeply about diversity and inclusion and hiring and building the right teams and for the right reasons. And so that's a perspective and a voice that she will bring to this that I appreciate. And then Chris Enslin, we've had the opportunity both to work with Chris as a client on multiple projects at RevUnit. His current role is at Visionworks, which is I would call it, it's a commerce company that helps people get better vision through both eyeglasses particularly, but also contact lenses. And they have lots of locations. They have some tremendous complexity of scale and challenge that I think will help round out some of the different perspectives as we represent both government and mid-sized business, the high growth business, startup, and well-funded financial technology companies, and then large scale already. I think you have 700, 800 locations.
Yeah, we just over 700 locations in 40 states in the US.
Yeah, and the way that I would characterize Chris, something nice about Chris, if the sun took human form, I think I would say it's Chris. And that doesn't mean he's like a glowing hot ball of gas or something. It's it's more that he leads with warmth and gratitude. And I've worked with a lot of amazing people, and Chris definitely, like, my first impression was like, I need to be more like Chris Enslin. So that's like how I feel about Chris, and that's why I'm excited that we have this as a panel. So yeah, that's our panelists. And me, as Robin mentioned, that's kind of my intro. I worked here. I had an opportunity, as we talked about self-organization, to also self-organize out of Zappos, to form a business with some friends that was an agency that we've grown, that was then acquired by RevUnit. And we get to work with Zappos still. So I feel quite lucky. I get to have kind of the best of everything. I still am part of the Zappos family that I felt very, very emotionally aligned to from a vision and purpose. And I also get to be an entrepreneur, which was my vision and dream. So yeah, that's me, and I live here in Vegas. So yeah. To quickly unpack our structure for this, because I'm tired of listening to myself, and I'm excited for all the things. As we talk about politics of change, we recognize that it's the best way to talk about change, as I alluded to earlier, is story. And stories are the ways that we transmit culture. So we wanted to anchor the structure of our outline for today's conversation in stories. So each of us, through dialoguing with each other, have come up with individual stories where the way we started it was around the discussion of this is a time that I felt uncomfortable. So what we're going to do is share a story or tell a story and then share a tactic. So oftentimes as we facilitate workshops, especially with change agents, we have found that it's very useful to have it be a tangible takeaway. So not just a bunch of words, which can also be quite valuable and affirming, but also like tangible things that you can say, okay, I'm going to go and now apply this in my interactions, whether that's work or professionally or personal or professional. So that's really the intent here, is share a story, tell a tactic, tell a story, share a tactic, and then we'll collectively unpack those as a group as we process them. And some of these, from the perspective of change and the political nature of people and just trying to make something that's real and not rehearsed or staged. Some of these are things that we're actually still emotionally trying to process and deal with. So they're not resolved. And even it may not be that we're necessarily the heroes of every story as much as just co-participants trying to make sense of it. So that's the way we're going to structure this. And for the most part, it'll be a conversation amongst us with silent audience. But if there's something that's extremely resonant, I'm very open to someone wanting to share and to help interject and participate. That's the structure. And Ragini's going to start, and we're going to have a conversation, and we're very grateful that you're all here too. So that's something that I have been having, what we're going to model here, conversations with individuals in this audience for the past 24 hours, and that's been great. So this is kind of all of us up on stage. Not that we had a chance to do it, but I really feel like the standing ovation is for all of us. So if I could retroactively categorize that, it's one for the entire responsive conference and not just us on stage. So Ragini.
Thank you for the amazing introduction. It's really nice. Okay, my heart is actually pumping because I wasn't sure if I wanted to share this story. And I see Heather in the audience right now. Thank you for our conversation last night. I've decided, and I'm nervous more, and probably just because I'm up here, but also more so because I didn't expect to come to a lot of people that I've just met recently and say, hey, I need help in finding some resolution, because in that conversation, I realized even more so that this is something that's bugging me for a very long time now. So to kind of set the scene a little bit, actually, before I go into that, I want to, just so that you can understand me a little bit more. So I spent most of my career, like the challenges that I've faced, have been more as a person of color when I talk in the workplace. So anything that, any type of discrimination that I felt or whatever it was coming from, at least my interpretation, the way that I process it, was coming from that standpoint. It wasn't until I was in more, I was in an executive level roles that gender became more prevalent to me, that's what was showing up. And because I spent so many years, like a lot of years, trying to figure out how to navigate and continue to climb, and learn and grow and develop and figure out who my network was going to be, that changed a little bit, right? Because I wasn't necessarily prepared for that. And there are not as many women of color in those positions. So it was really, really hard to find, and I'm still having a really hard time. And I face challenges all the time. So I want to make sure that you understand that, because it's still pretty new and raw for me. So to set the scene, kind of the story so you understand, it was an executive meeting. There was at that time a woman executive on the team. Unfortunately, she was out of office that day. We were about to go into a recruiting update. So a few members of my recruiting team had come in to prep because it was about to be their time. We were going to talk a little bit more about recruiting. And so we were finishing up a conversation in the room. And I'm just going to call, what should I call him? I'll call him Jim. Does that work? George? I don't know. Okay, sure. George in the room. And also,
Roger.
What's that?
Roger.
I'm going to stick with George. I'm fixated on George now. We're on George. So George in the room, and primarily all white men, myself, and then a few members of my team, mostly women, in the room. And George, everybody's giving George a hard time. Deliverables aren't being met. We're about to have a board meeting. What are we going to tell them? This was supposed to be done. How are we going to communicate this? And I could tell the body language. There's just there's a lot of pressure. Nobody wants to be in the hot seat, right? And for whatever reason, he must have been. And these are my perspective. These are my assumptions and my experience. And so in that, he was looking for, I guess, the weakest link, and I equaled that to him, and immediately said, "Well, we're just going to say that recruiting didn't do it." And in that moment, it was my feelings at the time. I heard I don't even know how to describe the sound. And it was, I couldn't process what was happening because I just thought that's complete. That doesn't even make any sense. And I was trying to find my voice, and everybody was talking over me. Nobody's really asking me. I'm the expert in the room on recruiting and hiring, and nobody's actually asking me about what's happening. Is that true even, right? And so to find my voice, I just blurted out what I was feeling, and I just said, bullshit. And in that moment, everybody got very quiet and looked at me like I'm the crazy person in the room. And it's important to understand, even though that's how I showed up, I've been in so many executive meetings to that point where this was the normal behavior in the room. So I didn't think that it would be surprising. It wasn't out of behavior for me either.
Not just your normal behavior, but culturally.
Culturally, it was the normal behavior in the room. And George said to me, "Well, why is that bullshit?" And I said, "Because it's complete. There's no, how can you back this up? And I started going through the data. We started going back and forth. There was a lot of noise, and I was just sifting through the noise and just focused on George. And I could feel the energy of my team members behind me. And I felt an obligation to represent myself at the table. And I felt an obligation to have their back, right? To really show that this is not okay. You can't just pass the buck on a team. When you should be accountable. And so anyway, the meeting time ran out, and people are starting to exit, go into their next meeting. But most of the executives were still squatting there, and we kept on going at it. And then I finally, the energy was, we were both very heated, and I started to say, okay, we'll just pick this up another time. I started walking out, and then he followed me out, and George said to me, I want to talk to you real quick because I don't like the way this is ending. And he's like, I apologize if I came out wrong. Maybe we should talk about this a little bit later. And I immediately thought, oh, I didn't expect that. And I was still angry, right? But I just thought, okay, yes, let's talk about this later. Because a part of me, even though I was more about myself, understood that wasn't necessarily easy for him. And we did. We had a very long conversation. It was really, really hard. And we did, in our own way, find some resolution. I found an ally that day. Who showed up for me a little bit, and I'll get to that in a second. But, and in the meantime, my team's giving me kudos and saying, okay, this is great. Thank you for showing up. Thanks for having our back. This is great. So I went home feeling like, all right, I got this. I can figure this out. It's hard, but I can figure this out. Then the weekend happened, and some of the observing execs in the room, one of them started a thread and added everybody on there. Now, mind you, I'm the only woman on the thread. It's only the executives who were in the room. And said that I made him feel uncomfortable, and there was a collective voice. I remember the themes were you made more than a few of us uncomfortable. Your behavior was unacceptable. It was aggressive. You're not being a good role model. Actually, this one got me. This is the one that it's very hard for me to process, right? It was, you weren't being a good role model to the other women in the room. And that's the one, right? Because that's what I'm striving for. That's what drives me, right? So
were there other women in the room?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they were on my team. So no women executives, just my team, right? And so I didn't really know how to process it. I'm just reading it. Threads it's a huge email thread. There was also a note of there should be some sort of insinuating an apology was in order. So I left it alone. My boss was on the email. My boss, I thought, was not there because he wasn't in the room, but apparently he was on the phone, and I didn't know that. So when in the thread, he forwarded it to me, and he's like, hey, can we just hop on a quick call? And in that quick call, that's when I learned he was in the room. And what drove me insane was, I can't believe you were in the room. I'm here advocating for my team, and you're supposed to be my biggest ally. You're supposed to advocate for me. And that's how I left that conversation. And so I didn't know where to turn. I was just really trying to figure it out. So of course, I'm so grateful for my husband, my partner, right? He's my everything. And I said to him, like, I don't know what to do here. And he said, your choices are, you can quit. You're going to face this. You're going to continue to face this no matter what. It's hard. You chose this. You can quit, or you can face it and be okay. Like, just, you have your dignity. You figure it out. It's going to be hard, but then you keep on going through it, right? And so I took that. I wrote an email, and in the email I just said, I encourage you to talk to members of my team. I feel like I've been a role model. And so, or I didn't say I feel, I know that I've been a role model. I never apologized. I did open the space, and I said, I would like to take this off email and talk to any of you. Please, I will move things on my calendar. Just come to me and set up time, because I didn't want to go and chase this, right? That was how I felt at the time. And George showed up. George wrote an amazing reply all, took full accountability and ownership in that moment. But nobody else in that thread ever set up time with me or anything like that. There are a lot of takeaways that I've had from that. I took for granted the network that I did have in the room with that woman executive. She was not there. It made me realize, like, you can't take for granted the network you do have in the room, and then how much you have to continue to build out your network. And even though I had other allies in the room, they didn't necessarily know how to show up for me. And I didn't know, like, it's okay to ask people for help. I didn't know that. There's just this assumption that, okay, we're good humans, we'll stick up for each other, we work together, and so forth. So I have started to do some of that as well. But I think the thing that is my biggest struggle is around it's not that I don't believe any of it. It's just the fact that somebody would say you're not being a good role model to the other women in the room. And, Heather asked me a question last night, which is interesting. It hasn't been asked before. And that's what made me impact the story a little bit more, which was like, this is something that could have affected your brand or reputation as a leader. And I actually haven't gotten to that point, because I was more concerned about not as a leader in the organization, but more about just me showing up and continue to stand up for myself and find my voice, because I'm still trying to figure that out. But it has. It is completely, right? I'm one of those executives. I've heard from my team member that he said, oh, she's nothing but a defensive woman. So it has showed up in different ways. And I haven't even started to unpack any of that. So it's been so much time since then. I still continue to find my voice. It helps to continue to talk about it, for sure. But I think, and I try to pay it forward too. So I will say to other women, if I see any woman trying to say something, especially a woman of color, is really trying to find her voice, I will make sure that I remember that that's happening and bring her into the conversation. So I try to do those things, but I still don't have resolution for myself, right? So I'm going to stop there for a second, because I said a lot, but I don't know. I guess I don't even, I know it's a big ask to say I need help, but it's more of, I'm very interested in because I'm just meeting you all for very recently, like, what are some things that maybe I'm not thinking about that could help me unpack that a little bit more? Because it's very important to me. I feel a huge sense of responsibility, especially to women of color. It's actually what keeps me going, and it makes me be a great recruiter. Really, like, I'm going to figure it out. Or I'm going to have somebody on my team who figures it out. Like, that's what motivates me. So if I don't have that energy to continue, it's deflating, right? So that's kind of, I don't know. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, I'm quick on the draw, but I want to make sure it's anybody else.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. And it was a delight to meet you on the phone. And we started off a great conversation on the phone. And the situation you explained, at least in my experience, listening to try and understand and not listening to try and answer the question was so important to me, because I've been in situations where I was ill-equipped, right, to support my colleagues that I worked with that was in similar situations with you. And the responsibility in high velocity culture change, it really depends on trust, right? And that example you used is a great one of stepping up, standing up for what you believe in. But for all of us that are going through change, there's a responsibility, regardless of what your gender or color or role in the organization is, to build an inclusive environment where people's voices are heard and you can bring your best self to work every single day. And in that sits sponsorship, right? And we talked about coaching in one of the previous sessions, but I think once you have a trust relationship, to know that there's not going to be any negative impact to standing up for what you believe in, that's how you build trust and confidence. And I don't have the perfect answer. I'm not even a people professional like many of you, but I really just have to operate from a position of authenticity. And if you believe in treating people well and understanding the situation and where they come from, you can really be a sponsor and someone to help on. At least that's my my belief and how I try and operate, every day.
Yeah, and I would add to that. Thank you, Ragini, for sharing that. I wasn't there, obviously don't know any more than what you've told us, but it sounds like there could be some unconscious bias at play. And one of the things that I have found useful for facing unconscious bias is a combination of pushing and being patient, which is not easy. And I'm sure we've all had experiences with this, and you have to strike the right balance. But I am the sort of person who wants change immediately. If I feel wronged, I had a boss who always talked over me. It drove me crazy. And I want them to fix that behavior immediately. That's not generally possible because the boss that I had in this case was not even aware of that behavior. So it took 2 years of working together for me to point out every time my boss did this and be patient. And by the end of 2 years, they were catching themselves doing it. Mm-hmm. But that was a really difficult time for me to wait that out and to be patient through that.
Yeah, I thank you both. It's interesting because for the reason why at least I'm starting to think that it's hard for me is because my responsibility is to build teams, and I hire and hire and hire, double and triple. This is what I do in early stage startups, and so and I'm really focused on hiring for diversity. And so if I don't feel supported, and I try be as authentic as I possibly can and show vulnerability, right? But if I don't feel supported as a leader, and then I'm building this team, it feels a little bit like I struggle with that. And the reality of the situation is that it's not unique to any organization. Like it will show up in different, at least for me, it shows up in different ways. So it's going to show up. So I think that has a little bit to do with, with saying you're not being a good role model for women when that's mine. That's mine, man. Like you can't, that's what I got, right? So that's what is driving me. And if I can't necessarily ensure that everybody's going to have a safe experience and feel like they can bring themselves to work and have their voice, if that's not there, at least I can show up the way I need to. So it feels like I have to play two different roles there, and that conflict it sucks many times. But you can't, like if you show, I struggle, like, do I show the vulnerability to everybody and tell them? And sometimes I do. And sometimes I'm like, nope, I gotta show them that it's going to be okay. You can keep on kind of moving. So that's a little bit of it too.
Yeah. And that reminds me of Jenny's story. So I think we could jump into your story and, keeping in mind too, some tactics, right? Like just to call those out, like sounds like building an advocacy network is a critical tactic. What's another one? Like having an opportunity to interface on a one-to-one. Like yesterday, Jenny, who was a participant in one of in the workshop we did, mentioned something about recognizing that certain channels are meant for certain things, and important conversations should not be in the wide and shallow channels like Slack. We need to go deep and small and really like take it offline, take it on the one-to-one. It's really difficult to be angry at someone when they're right in front of you as a human and you can interface and find an opportunity to be human together. So that was...
Yeah, and I would just like add on to that. So with conflict resolution, if somebody says, I want to solve for this now, don't delay it. Do it right away. Right away. Because a lot of times you do want to delay because you don't want to face those things. So that was really important for us to connect and then him show up as an ally for me.
Yeah, which like one of the stories that we shared on the phone. And then, yeah, Jenny, who's familiar with Brene Brown? I'm sure most people are because she's awesome. I had forgotten that I'd heard this from her, but the whole, if you've seen her Netflix special, The Story I'm Telling Myself is a quick way that she's able to find a bridge to have a conversation about her subjective view and and to put that in front of someone without it feeling like they have to solve it as much as just hear it. And I've found that to be tremendously successful in my own, because I can be quite pig-headed is the word I was going to say, specific about what I want to achieve. And so at times, like I've definitely needed that. So anyway, Jenny.
All right. I'm also going to be a little pig-headed and apologize to the panel. I'm calling an audible and changing the story.
Great.
Because you talked about government transformation, and I want to touch on that a little bit because it is what I spent several years doing, and it was incredibly fucking hard. So I'm going to tell a story, since this is a people conference, about working with an HR team within the White House. So quick background so you understand the context. The United States Digital Service, where I was, is a new agency at the White House that was founded in 2014. And I joined when it was about a year old. And the whole mission of what I'm now going to call USDS is to bring modern tech talent into government. Its existence came out of the healthcare.gov fiasco. So the point of the organization was bringing people in. So as the people team within USDS, we were really the engine that allowed that team to deliver anything. So when I joined, we had a goal of hiring about 130 people in 12 months. We don't have good data on how fast the government hires for a variety of reasons we can talk about later. But the model hiring process as laid out by the Office of Personnel Management is 81 business days. That is the fastest they think you can hire someone in government. We could not hire 130 people in 12 months at that pace. So we were doing a lot of crazy things, all okay within the law and the statutes of the time. But we were trying a lot of things that had never been done in government before, certainly never been done in the White House, which is a very conservative, risk-averse environment. And we were pushing on everyone that we worked with. And it was excruciating, probably for them too, but especially for us. So one of the teams we had to work with was the official HR team. We were in charge of recruiting and selection, but they had to process our hires. So we handed them off to the HR team and they had to rubber stamp them, hopefully. We ran into problems with that. And then push them for security clearance and all the other paperwork and things that they needed to do to actually become official employees. That process, when I started, was taking anywhere from 4 to 9 months. After we had already done interviews with these people, we've done all the qualification. This was a problem. You can imagine that we were very frustrated. I assume that the HR team was also very frustrated with us. They're just trying to do their job. They're under-resourced. They're overstressed. Everyone is mad at them all the time, not just us, all the components. And they were very afraid of making a mistake and being held accountable for that by the auditors, right? In government, your greatest fear is getting held accountable by an auditor of some kind and then getting fired, getting thrown up on the front page of the Washington Post. None of these are good things. So we were basically at an impasse where we were just like sitting on opposite sides of a street, actually. We were in different buildings and like lobbing angry emails at each other where they would reject our hires. And we would go, but they're so good. Like they're the same level qualified as this other person you hire. And they'd be like, no, we don't understand their resume. So we're not going to hire them. This went on for many months. We had a variety of issues with them. And it got to the point where we were never going to hit our goals if we weren't able to push them somehow in a direction where they could move a little bit faster and we had more visibility into what they were doing. So there are a couple of ways we could have done this, and we tried a lot of things. One of the options is reducing their perceived risk or costs to doing what we wanted them to do. Another one is to increase the reward that they got from it. We tried a lot of reducing risk, but there's only so much you can do to reduce risk. So we shifted gears to focus on how do we increase their reward. So we came up with this plan. It was not just mine, it was my whole team, to tell them thank you. That was our tactic. That I'm ruining the ending, but that is our takeaway tactic here, was really saying thank you to them. So we waited till they did something that we were happy about. I don't remember what it was. And then we invited the whole HR team to the Roosevelt room, which is the president's conference room. It's across from the Oval Office. It's hard to book. Like, you don't get access to it. So that in and of itself, even if we just like went and sat there and had sandwiches, would have been exciting. Exciting for me, exciting for them. So we brought them all to that room. We had a high-ranking member of the administration come in and tell them thank you. But then most impactfully, we had one of the people they had hired, that they had actually passed through the process, come in and talk about the project that they were working on. And the specific project they were working on was an application for veterans to apply for healthcare. And this, you can, there's a blog post on the USCS's website. You should go read it. It is an absolutely heartbreaking and inspirational story that before this, like 10% of applications for healthcare from the VA were processed online. Once we helped them rebuild this application and make it actually functional in 2016 or whatever year this was, it was over 80%. And something like 200,000 veterans got access to healthcare because of this. So we had someone they had hired come in and tell that story in front of them, show videos of users testing the prototypes for the website. And it was a transformational moment for our relationship with them. And when we walked out of that meeting, we heard from one of the supervisors that no one had ever told them thank you before, which you all work in people ops. You can probably believe that. They just had people come in and yell at them and tell them they were being too slow and they weren't doing things right. No one had ever said, thank you for your service. Here is what you're achieving. Like, they are a service org. They don't get to see a lot of that. So being able to put that in front of them really changed how they thought about the work that they were doing with us. It was not seamless from there. They still rejected some of our hires, but now we had a newfound level of trust in order to have conversations with them about what was going on. And it changed our entire relationship with the HR team in one hour meeting. And it took us at least 2 years to get to the point where we had that moment where like, this is a way to solve this problem. So that was my takeaway, is saying thank you and showing the connection to the work and increasing their desire to help us was incredibly powerful in helping drive change in their organization.
Yeah, I think now is when you just drop that thing that you're holding. 'Cause that's awesome. Thank you. Does anyone want to counter, or not counter, but like share any additional examples of when you've said thank you? Or
Sorry, my other story, I was not the hero. That was the hero story.
No, but I wanted to ask you, how have you carried that forward now, taking that example and then pulling it forward?
I think about it every day. Whenever I face resistance, which happens all the time, I say, have I said thank you to this person recently? Have they seen the outputs of what we're working on together? And sometimes the answer is yes, and then I need to find something else. But sometimes it's no, and then I try to do that.
yeah, it reminds me of one of the times when I was working on internal tools here at Zappos, which is, I really love internal tools and applications because you have an opportunity to have a user that you can deeply understand because they're your coworker. So it was just helping take the team down to meet this group of people who had a job that was really difficult that they were building for, and just introducing them and saying like, these are the names and the faces behind the thing that we're building, which it was transformational for, the technology individuals that I got to work with to say, okay, yeah, this is who I'm impacting. So yeah, Tabitha, I guess you should share your story.
Yeah. So my story is about communication and change around that. And so I had actually put out an all-company communication, and it had gone out through Slack, and I had somebody who responded to that through Slack as a strong detractor, not only of what I was communicating, but also of me personally and even my people operations team. So there were some specific targets that hit me really hard there. And so I had a choice in that moment, and that really stung. I mean, it always stings when you have those. I had a choice of like, okay, am I going to let this go and just move on? Or am I going to directly address this with this individual and see if I can actually make a difference in that relationship? And this was a person of influence for us. And we're only a 100-person company, so we're really small. So in my mind, every relationship that I have really does matter. And so I asked the person if they would be willing to meet with me. They said yes. And so we sat down together and I just shared with him, hey, you know what, this really hurt me personally. Also, you're undermining the message that I really feel like is important for our team to hear. And, I really care about my team. And when you're talking negatively about my team, this hurts them as well. And I don't want you to do that. And I also want to provide some more context. And in this case, I couldn't give all the details. There were some things that were confidential around the circumstance that I had communicated about. And so I gave as much context as I could to this individual and then just said, could we continue to talk? Like what I would really value is additional feedback like this face to face. And so he ended up actually apologizing and saying, hey, I didn't handle that well. Also, I didn't realize your perspective at all in that situation. And yeah, I'm going to remove what I put in Slack. And also, yeah, I'd love to talk to you more, and let's have an ongoing dialogue. And so the tactics for me, one of the things that was really important is, okay, let's keep the feedback line open. Also, no hard feelings. Hey, we had this intense interaction, but I don't want that to be what drives our relationship moving forward. Let's just let this go. Let's move on. And then please come back to me and talk to me if you have things that you want to talk to me about. And the really cool thing about that is that now he has become an advocate for me. He is somebody who will come proactively to me and share feedback. And so we have this open dialogue that actually makes my communications to the whole company a lot stronger in that situation. And I also use him as one of my feedback people. So I reach out to him and say, can you please just help me figure this out? And we actually recently had a communication go out this week, a video communication that he was a part of that we had great feedback about and that landed really well. And so the takeaway for me was, how do we provide clarity and context and in the changes that we're trying to make in the communication, and also how important it is to get face to face with somebody when you're having a conflict, so we can sit down and have that and then move forward from it and let it go and move on. So we can focus on the right things together.
Yeah, one of the questions I'm curious about too, because we experience this, is as the person who has information that can't be shared, that is essential context for certain key decisions. Like, how do you both protect that kind of information, but also communicate to fellow leaders? Like, and I'm sure this is a question that people deal with on the regular in this audience, but like, what is the experience of this panel with that kind of context? Because it can be hard to establish trust, to Chris's point and numerous other speakers too, when you don't have all the information and you can't hear all the information. So I'm curious, both Tabitha's strategies or anyone's strategies, like, what has this group done to help deal with that?
I know for me, it was a very direct ask of this individual. Hey, I know I can't give you all the information, but I'm asking you to trust me. I use the words, I'm asking you to trust me in this situation. And hopefully it will prove out over time to you that that's the case. And I think it did in this case, but it was just an open, straight ask.
Yeah, I would add to that. That's a great way to do it. And then also, for our situation, because we're adding like 100 people a quarter, right? And so we're a small company that's growing really fast. you assume trust and you're hoping for trust, but sometimes it's really, really hard when you don't know everybody. And so giving context around why you cannot share the information, because people just want to be a part. You just have to bring them along in the conversation. They just want to understand, why don't I have access to this information? So if you actually explain that, instead of saying no, people tend to understand that.
What's an example? Like, how would you explain that?
Oh, so yeah, I mean, one that's coming is actually very recent. It's an exit in the organization, a leader exit in the organization, right? And people just want to understand, like, how did we get to this point? Why wasn't it communicated when you knew about it, and so forth? And so just making people understand that, hey, like, there's a reason around this. There's an order of operations. This is why we have an order of operations. How would you feel if you were in this? Because my personal tactic, always from a leadership perspective, is to drive from empathy. So if I say, like, how would you feel if this was your team and you found out about the information in a haphazard way instead of from the right source? How would that make you feel? And then typically people will say, okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other tactics or approaches to that? Awesome. Chris, I know you've got a story as well.
Yeah, I will comment as well, Tabitha, on what you mentioned. But so to go back a little bit, I grew up in technology. I'm a technologist by trade, but have evolved to become a person that is really, really interested in how change happens in organizations. So I love to live right at the intersection of physical and digital. And in the past 10 years, I've been really engaged with retail because that changed so much. So if you put that as a backdrop, had the great privilege to work for companies early on like Dell that taught me supply chain and taught me how to move at high speed through a purely digital channel. Then for 7 years at Walmart, going into that battle with a really great opponent like an Amazon, right? And to see how physical organizations need to tilt over to digital. And in that whole get together, it's that intersection of physical and digital with a change on how she chooses to shop your brand. That's where I love to live. And when I saw this panel about politics of change, you've heard all of the stories that were told. And in essence, those were the things where I made my biggest mistakes, right? Because I had thought I had the playbook all figured out. So a couple of years ago, I transitioned and went to a much smaller company, privately held, that really had the additional component of healthcare and patient. Our aspiration is just to provide flawless vision, unexpectedly simple, right? Right at that intersection of physical and digital. So I thought my playbook was going to work so well. I jumped with all this experience into a smaller company. And I don't know if John's still in the audience, right? But I was tired of the cruise ship, and I wanted to be on the cruise ship that he showed that was more like a high-speed motorboat, right? And I was so excited about it. So I had my little playbook figured out, and it had 4 quadrants. It had culture, it had customer/patient. The third one was ways of working. And then the fourth one was technology, because I'm a technologist. So what happens is, it's so funny. I come into the airport last night, and as usual, sitting at the gate, and I'm watching people sitting there waiting on their flight, and everyone's cool and calm and listening to their whatever device of choice. And then, look, comes up on the monitor, flight's been canceled. Nothing else, right? So there's various channels of communication. You have your little mobile app, you have the screen, you have people, nothing. You know how that really great group of people immediately changed? And it became violent all of a sudden. And that's why I love the story that Tabitha told, because in essence, in that first segment of culture, communication is so, so important, right? And the first thing that we did to kind of show some of the tactics is there's no excuse, right? Robin talked about early days getting Slack channels. You have to have either a Slack channel, if it's Jabber or Workplace, whatever, but to very quickly collect the communities of the people that are going to go through the change, and make that available, as you mentioned, so that everyone understands what's going to take place, right? And also you have to understand the culture, whether the culture is ready for change, and can you radically change the model? And then to quickly switch over into ways of working, I mean, it is amazing when you look at how people work. You are so fortunate, and I'm so delighted to be with Tony and the great company that he built on this campus, right? Because many people grew up in that new way of working. But when you are working with more traditional companies that have to reinvent themselves, it becomes tremendously difficult if you want to hold on to the old ways of working. So in that bucket, that was like really a big lesson learned for me. And then lastly, patient and customer, and Chris, that's where we engaged with RevUnit is, if you don't view everything through the eyes of the customer, getting back into inclusion and diversity and how you want to perceive your brand, right? The people that shop your brand and the communities where we do business in, you want to represent your workforce in that same way, right? And there's a huge change there when you look at understanding what your patients think of your brand and what your customer think of your brand. It was really embarrassing when we did the quantitative and qualitative analysis to find out what they really thought about the brand. And then to build that playbook around the brand, everything with the customer at the center. And then people, I can't tell you anything about people because I met the most amazing people here at this conference. You know, Chuck's sitting right in front here. He's building platforms by which new archetypes are able to display their capabilities to employers. And I think my friend Anton is sitting on the other side working on collaboration platforms with Microsoft. There's a lot happening. And I think we are completely misunderstanding the importance still at the moment on what people leadership and the advancement on the essential role that our employees or associates or people in the organizations are going to play. I'll stop there and hand back to you.
Yeah, one of the things I appreciate too about your perspective is you're talking external, right? Not just the internal challenge of change, right, but also how that is perceived. I remember when we went with Pete Bridgman, the CEO of Visionworks, and he was characterizing that desire for Visionworks to transform from a commodity or an experience to a brand. And he was characterizing the experience of going to this, to the stores, if anyone's ever been eyeglass shopping. And he was like, it's somewhere between a used car salesman and the DMV, right, today, with a price tag that suddenly surprises you at the end, right? Like, and having the right measure of the challenge and then devising and really advocating for as a collective C-suite of data-driven change and like new strategic shifts. And one of the things I'm curious about quickly is as you change the company's approach and developed a new playbook, like how was that received across the organization? You have a lot of, you know, it's more hierarchical because it is is it a franchise model? I believe it.
Right. We have 3 doctor models, sublease, PC, and then employed, and then all stores. So real quickly, I'm so fortunate to be a part of this leadership team because Pete is one of the brightest individuals that I ever had the pleasure to working with. And it starts with a purpose, right? Immediately connecting and moving away from product to purpose. And you've heard the story. We reset context, first of all, before we started changing the what around the purpose and then the values. And it's very simple. It's be simple, be human, and be bold, right? That's what we live by with the customer at the center of all that. And when you do that, the changes, it has a need for radical transparency, because if you don't show the patient or the customer transparency into pricing, and you don't share that with the associate or the employee or the people that are facing the customer, remember, those are the folks that have to be able to move with her through her moments of disappointment or jubilation, as she moves from scheduling the eye exam to transitioning over into retail to actually picking up her glasses, right? So it's very, very important from the top down to have a very holistic approach that starts with culture, values, purpose, and then giving people the responsibility and accountability to then boldly lead to do the right thing every day for that patient. Because I'll stop after this statement, but there is really no other line of practice in healthcare where you can actually fix the situation, right? It is a tremendously fulfilling purpose to know that you can help someone see. And there's no excuse anymore for us not to do that really, really well.
I'm curious if there's other purpose statements that each of you can think of, either at your current position or in the past, that have been animating for you and for teams. I can think of, I will share, but I want to make sure there's time first for anybody else. Okay, while you're thinking, I'll go. We're at Zappos, right? For those who, I don't know if there's a tour. Thank you. I don't know if there's a tour or not that has been available to everyone, but one of the things that I always appreciated was how truly empowered the culture is here to deliver wow to a customer. And you felt that. And part of that process that John Bunch mentioned earlier today of this month-long hiring boot camp, basically, that everyone goes through, is working the phones, learning how to work the phones, learning how to interact with the customer one-to-one, and understanding that proximity of choice and decision really facilitates where the stories come from, where the culture gets to manifest. I could think of so many different examples, and he even shared one about the adaptive team being able to respond to a person in need, expressly opening up a new line of business. And that is a really compelling story, one, because it's serving a community that's underserved. It's also aligning to a business goal and magnifying the vision that is what animates everyone to be here, at this campus. And so, it's pretty cool to see that manifest in all these different ways. And I feel like we're lucky to do that in the same way at RevUnit, about helping organizations work better and to develop the tools and the toolkits and the paradigms that they need to go as change agents and kind of be, this is a stupid metaphor, like the leaven in the bread to help everything rise. Like there's that phrase of all boats rise with the tide. If you have the right change agents with the tactics and tools to go back and say thank you, for example, or to, find the advocates within the organization to develop that ability to dialogue with them and to have that one-to-one connection that facilitates and allows for better experiences and better communications, right? Like that's powerful. So, we're quite lucky that we get to form this collective cohort, and develop those strategies and refine them together. So if anyone has anything they want to share, I think we have roughly 3 minutes or so. So if there's any comments or editorializing that anyone in the audience wants to do, very open to that as well. Or we can also end early. But if someone wants to share, Robin, do we have an extra mic that could be walked around in case someone does have anything they want? Cool. Okay. Did someone raise their hand over here? I see a finger pointing. Oh, okay, right here. Sorry.
Hello. Awesome. Thank you. It's been really cool and inspiring to listen to your stories. So thank you all. Being a change agent and also working in HR can be incredibly isolating a lot of the time. And Jenny, you hit on this sort of paradox of pushing and patience. And Ragini, you talked a bit about how do we support leaders and leadership. I'm wondering if any of you can talk about how you've asked for support as a leader, whether it's from your manager or boss or CEO, and what type of support do you need to be able to be a change agent, and how do you ask for it?
I'll just share kind of what my approach has always been, because I honestly don't know any other way to do it. I just tell people how I'm really feeling. And I sometimes, so in that instance where I went and asked for help for the story that I shared, I said in that moment, I don't know what the expectation was. I made an assumption that you were going to be there for me and you didn't show up. And then you know what? That's my bad. I didn't share with you how I need you to show up. And so here are some ideas that I think would work. How do you feel about them? Because it is a two-way street, right? You don't want to place somebody else then to feel uncomfortable. Maybe they don't want to show up that way from you. And that's a really bad assumption, right? And so for me, it's just driving, and it works for me, but really opening up and being vulnerable and sharing, like, this is how I'm feeling, whether it's your intent or not. I want to have that hard conversation right now. And if you need an hour to go think about it and then come back, cool. I'll wait. I'll be waiting. But I want to have a really hard conversation. So that's worked for me. As far as like for myself, finding mentors or people that I'm still on that journey. So I piece everything together, try different things, see what works for me. You know, in one of the things at Affirm, there was no D&I initiative when I started, and I wanted to be very much a change agent for myself because I wanted to create that environment, and then also because I knew I had to build a diverse workforce. I was dedicated to that. So until we were able to find a D&I program lead and so forth, and we had budget for it, like I just decided I was going to do it. Whoever was going to help was going to help, and it took some time and convincing, and people were just looking at me like I was crazy half the time, but it was okay, right? Like it gave me once people like to follow. I've learned this, you know, and sometimes you have to be the one to stand up and then they follow you. And so that, I don't know if that's helpful, but that's kind of been what's been helpful for me.
Yeah, that's great. And we're at time. So thank you everyone so much for participating, for listening. Thank you, panelists. Yeah, round of applause for all of us.